Count Corla, and I welcome the opportunity to say a few words on this legislation this evening. It is an important piece of legislation. Some of it is technical in its nature, but the overarching premise and what it's seeking to do to reintroduce the board to oversee the operation of the HSE will, I hope, have beneficial ramifications for our health service. It's interesting to look at how we got here, because I have had the privilege before I was elected of representing workers, and it's very interesting to hear Deputy Donnelly's story about how they should be listened to, because I represented them when Fianna Fáil were in government and they were roundly ignored. In fact, I was sitting in government buildings when the then Taoiseach of the day, in the face of industrial action on behalf of tens of thousands of healthcare workers, called a general election, suspended the talks and literally walked right away from the table. So it's an interesting story that Deputy Donnelly tells, but the history of his party is one of actually ignoring frontline healthcare professionals, and something that I hope will change, and I hope a lesson has been learned. It's only 6 years since Fine Gael abolished the then board of the HSE in favour of creating a Director General and conferring more powers on the Minister. Now, what the Minister exactly did with those additional powers is literally anyone's guess, because I don't know. Dismantling of the health service was announced by James Riley, the then Minister for Health. He pushed strongly for what he called reform of the health system. It wasn't based on available evidence, certainly wasn't based on talking to experts or frontline healthcare professionals, but simply based on the belief that he himself was right. The changes and the decision to scrap the executive were agreed in the 2011 programme for government between Fine Gael and Labour. In the Seanad, the Minister had the temerity to say that the Directorate Governance System of the HSE, introduced through the Health Service Executive Governance Act 2013, was by its nature and design and by intent always envisaged as an interim measure. The Taoiseach, when he was Minister for Health, went on to say that the executive would be fully dismantled by 2020. Unsurprisingly, this didn't materialise, and so we find ourselves here, and the board must return. The new board will be a slimmed-down 9-person version of the former HSE board. Sinn Féin opposed the original legislation which sought to dissolve the board, not because we thought the board was perfect, or indeed because we thought it was working extremely well, but because the legislation which delivered its removal was unclear. It weakened the health service through the removal of the board for the purposes of oversight, and it bestowed far too much additional power on the Minister. It didn't give the Dáil additional powers of scrutiny or make the Minister further answerable to the Dáil. I don't think there is another multi-billion euro healthcare body operating anywhere in the world without an appropriate board to provide oversight. It is welcome, therefore, that the Government has seen fit to reverse the decision of 6 years ago, but let's not fool ourselves. That wasn't the Government's decision. That was a recommendation of the Sláinte Care Committee. I and others sat on that committee, and that's where it came from. So if pats on the back are being handed out, I think Roisin Shortall should probably get one ahead of anyone who sits at the Cabinet table. It was important to see the amendments in the Seanad which guaranteed that 2 of the people appointed under the paragraph to support the board would have experience or expertise in advocacy in relation to matters affecting patients. Obviously, this followed from the suggestions made by Gabriel Scally in the scoping inquiry. It was unfortunate that the same accommodation couldn't be made to include worker representatives on the HSE board. We feel that workers should have some form of representation on the board, and that healthcare and medical professionals would be of huge benefit to the board in its workings. The participation of healthcare workers would be an asset. It would help to ensure a deeper understanding of clinical issues, best practice, quality indicators and other issues relating to the safety and quality of care and overall delivery of healthcare by the HSE. Sinn Féin had submitted amendments to this end, but they were ruled out of order. We will be submitting reworded amendments to this effect at committee stage, and we hope that they will be supported, because I don't think there's anything wrong with having healthcare workers represented on the board that oversees their own the operation of their workplace. But I think more importantly, They have a lot to offer in terms of their membership of the board and in terms of the expertise that they can bring. The Government claims that the new board will restore public confidence in the HSE through a series of actions to strengthen the management, governance and accountability of the organisation. And these are grand claims, but they are the same, exactly almost, photocopy of the claims that were made when the board was dissolved. So we had to get rid of the board so we could have all of this accountability. Now we have to bring the board back so we can have this accountability. Maybe we could just have accountability and stop reforming the structures and just really focus on accountability. Only greater oversight and proper accountability of the board by the Minister of the day will ensure better governance, accountability and delivery for health services. It's a pity that that wasn't seen 6 years ago, because really that was the time when, if the Minister had the bit between his teeth and he was really interested in reform, then he probably could have done a better job 6 years ago. As stated before, I don't think that there is another multi-billion euro healthcare body anywhere in the world that operates without an appropriate board. So I do welcome the reintroduction of the HSE board, because it is standard practice for public bodies to have an independent board which operates at arm's length from the government and provides independent oversight, particularly in the context of the spending of public money and accountability to the taxpayer. It was a sad state of affairs for the former minister to do away with the necessary and important checks and balances. However, without actually radically altering how the board will operate in comparison with the previous regime and the previous board, then we are doomed to see the same mistakes made again. It is important that the board has the right mix of talents and that it is not just made up of ministerial appointees who are appointed for political reasons. And I am not saying that the current minister will do that. I don't believe that he will, but he won't be the minister forever. And when we look at some of those who sit at the cabinet table, I see people who have made appointments to boards which made as much sense as Caligula appointing his horse to the Roman Council. And let's be honest, this is a very important job that these people are going to be tasked with. We need to make sure that they are the right people who can deliver. It is a multi-billion euro organisation. A lot of taxpayers' money goes into it. We need an awful lot of accountability. We need to ensure against possible manipulation of appointing members to boards on the one hand and ensuring the best and most appropriate people are appointed on the other. It's important that any member appointed to the HSE board is familiar with and committed to seeing the implementation of Sláintecare. We have a unique chance to fix some of the problems in our health service, and that can't be achieved if those on the board of the HSE are not committed to working towards that through Sláintecare. And by that I mean a very real commitment to public health service, to the delivery of health care on the basis of need and not ability to pay, fully funded by the public purse, not through privatisation, but through the public health system. We also need to see progressive corporate governance reform at the highest level of the HSE. When the HSE board was dissolved, there was an opportunity to progressively reform the organisation in order to achieve the highest level of corporate governance. This wasn't done, and amendments to strengthen the legislation at the time were not facilitated. As I said, we didn't support the dissolution, and that was one of the reasons. Indeed, we have the same concerns again regarding the bill before the House. We would like to see the provisions strengthened to make the Minister for Health and the new board more accountable to the Dáil. The board must also be able to robustly hold the Minister to account, and the Oireachtas must be able to hold the chairman of the board to account. The re-establishment of the board cannot give the Minister the opportunity to hide behind or push aside the HSE when it suits. The HSE has been described as a growing monster by many, but in the main, that is because it hasn't been given adequate political direction by successive ministers for health. Just look at its initial foundation by Micheál Martin. He just amalgamated the old health boards. In fact, that's actually being kind, because what he did was he just shoved them together. It made no sense, and Deputy Donnelly has treated us to a few of the greatest hits of Fianna Fáil in government, but the ones I remember were the recruitment moratorium. I remember the privatisation, and I also remember that the first recorded overnight trolley wait was under a Fianna Fáil government. Since it has been dissolved, there has been a sequence of continuous bad moves and a lack of sensible direction. Sinn Féin welcomes the key fundamental principles as outlined by the Minister, those of independence, inclusiveness and compassion. At times these principles are sorely missing. They're not missing by nurses, doctors and healthcare professionals. They have that in abundance, and we know that, but they can be missing in the boardroom. The board, as the governing body, must be independent. It must be transparent, and it must ensure accountability in its actions in order that people can have confidence in the decision-making and management process within the HSE. Furthermore, it must be committed to a truly public health system. We cannot have members of the board who have conflicts of interest, such as stakes in private hospitals or video medicine systems, which for the avoidance of any doubt, are the antithesis of what it means to deliver public health care. While we need experience on the board, we do not need a conflict of interest. We need to see commitment to improve, commitment to the proper and prudent use of public funds, commitment to combating waste, and a commitment to ensuring direct health benefits and better outcomes for those who use the health service. The Minister previously said that members of the board will be expected to have experience and expertise in one or more of the following areas: corporate governance, patient advocacy, clinical governance, quality assurance and patient safety, strategic planning and change management, strategic human resource management and public communications. I would agree with the inclusion of all of the aforementioned. I would hope that strategic human resource management includes experience in workers' rights, because that is of huge importance. Let's not forget the HSE is, if memory serves, I think it is the single biggest employer in the state, if not one of the biggest. So an understanding of workers' rights and not simply human resource management is really, really important. I would like to welcome the appointment of Mr Kieran Devan as the Chair-designate of the new board. I understand that the public appointment service process to appoint a chair was exhaustive. I know Mr Devan has experience in health service provision from his time in Britain, where he was the Chief Executive of the charity Macmillan Cancer Support, and also where he served as a non-executive director of the NHS. Perhaps in time, when we have Mr Devan in front of the Health Committee, I'll get an opportunity to ask him about his time with the NHS in England and see what his analysis is of the performance of the NHS during that period and of the attempts by the Tories to privatise elements of the NHS. A huge job of work lies ahead for the new board, as well as the HSE, the Department of Health and the Sláinte Care Implementation Office, and I wish them very well in their endeavours. I look forward to further debating this bill at committee stage, and I've outlined the type of amendments that Sinn Féin will be bringing forward, and I look forward to engaging with Mr Devan. And in the few minutes that I have remaining, it would be remiss of me to stand here and not to mention the impending strike by nurses and midwives within our health service. And the reason I mention it is because one of the frustrating factors as a person who did represent healthcare workers, but I know this is still true today, is that very often you're sitting in a room with people who cannot make decisions. So in the absence of the Department of Public Expenditure and Reform, you're talking to the HSE officials, you're talking to the health service officials, but those people are not empowered to make that decision, and that is extremely frustrating for the healthcare professionals. It's obviously frustrating for nurses and midwives because they have found they have no option but to take industrial action. Now, we know that industrial action is the port of last call for any worker, but most especially for nurses and midwives. And I would like to see a situation where the HSE is empowered to make those decisions in the interest of the health service, to sit and have the power to actively negotiate, to actively engage with those healthcare professionals. And I know, and I heard Deputy Donnelly's view and the view of Fianna Fáil about how well paid they are. I heard it back in July at the Health Committee about how well paid nurses are, and that might be their view. I don't share that view, because we're competing with English-speaking countries where nurses are paid more, where their conditions are better, and that's why our nurses are leaving. So we need to have a health service that is empowered to deal with those frontline healthcare professionals that we need, and put in place strategies and know that they have the power to make good on any commitment that they make at the negotiating table, because I don't think that every person in this chamber shares the Fianna Fáil view about how well paid our nurses are, and I don't think that we should be making comparisons between our nurses and other healthcare workers in other jurisdictions, save for those jurisdictions where the nurses are going, because that's who we are competing with. We know that those people, that they are going when they leave, we know that they are leaving to go to other countries where the pay is better, and by comparison with those countries, they are not well paid. So what I hope for the new board is that they have the opportunity to actively engage with the healthcare professionals, to learn from them, and to be able and empowered to put in place strategies to recruit and retain key frontline healthcare professionals, because that is going to be the challenge to meet the capacity deficit that we have. That is going to be the challenge for the new board. That's going to be the challenge for the Minister going forward. Go on, Michael.